Ava's fingers were shaking so violently that the silver bowl slipped from her hands and shattered across the stone path, just as her mother shoved her toward the giant iron gates. The night above her was dark and heavy, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Her pale blue dress trembled against her skin in the cold air. Her hair, once carefully tied back by her own trembling hands, now stuck loosely around her face. She could still hear the words her father had spoken before dragging her out of the car. "Stop crying. You are 18 now. Do not ruin this for us." Ava stood there in the cold night, her body chilled, her heartbeat wild, as the gates slowly opened. Beyond them stood a mansion so large it looked less like a home and more like a kingdom, built for someone who had forgotten what mercy looked like. This was the estate of Ethan Calloway, the feared businessman whose name was spoken in low voices across the city. Men said he could buy anything. Women said he trusted no one. The poor said powerful people like him only came into their lives when something beautiful was about to be taken away. Ava barely had time to step back before her father, Victor Hayes, gripped her arm so hard it hurt and pushed her forward. Her mother, Helen, stood near the covered entrance, trying to keep herself composed, as if this night were some social transaction and not the sale of a human soul. "The payment came through," Victor said to the guards waiting under the covered entrance. "We checked before leaving. The girl is yours now." Ava's stomach turned so violently she almost threw up. She looked at her mother, praying for one final sign of softness, one crack in the cruelty she had lived under all her life. But Helen only avoided her eyes and adjusted the sleeve of her silk blouse. "She can cook, clean, sew, and learn quickly," Helen said, as though presenting a list of skills for livestock at an auction. "She knows how to stay quiet." That sentence cut deeper than anything else, because it was true. Ava had spent her whole life staying quiet. Quiet when they insulted her. Quiet when they used her. Quiet when they told her she was lucky they had raised her at all. Tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from and subscribe. Then the mansion doors opened. Ethan Calloway stepped into the golden light. He was taller than Ava expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in black, with the stillness of a man who did not need to shout because the world already moved when he lifted a finger. His face was unreadable, his jaw sharp, his eyes dark enough to hold secrets without ever spilling them. The night air touched his coat, but he looked untouched by weather, untouched by fear, untouched by the ordinary weaknesses of other men. Ava had imagined greed in his face, hunger, ownership, victory. Instead, when Ethan looked at her, something else passed through his expression. Pain, recognition, a kind of restrained fury that did not belong to this moment alone. His gaze shifted to Victor and Helen, and when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, and far more terrifying than rage. "Get them off my property." For a second, no one moved. Victor blinked. Helen stared. Even Ava forgot how to breathe. Victor tried to smile. "I beg your pardon?" Ethan took one step forward. "You heard me. Get them off my property. Now." Victor's face changed immediately. "Mr. Calloway, there must be some misunderstanding. We honored the arrangement. We brought the girl ourselves." Helen rushed in with nervous laughter. "She is healthy, obedient, and young. You won't have any problems with her." Ethan's eyes turned to her so coldly that she stopped mid-sentence. "If either of you says one more word about her in my house," he said quietly, You will leave this estate without the protection you expected from me." The silence that followed felt like the whole night had frozen around them. Protection. The word made no sense to Ava. Victor stiffened. "You agreed to settle our debt." Ethan's jaw hardened. "I agreed to end your access to her." Before Ava could process what that meant, two security men stepped forward. They did not touch Victor and Helen roughly, but they did not give them a choice. Helen finally turned to Ava, panic and anger twisting her face together. "Do not embarrass us," she snapped. "Do exactly what you are told for once in your life." Ava's hands curled into fists. For once in your life. As if years of serving them, scrubbing their floors, wearing their cast-off clothes, and swallowing every cruelty had ever been rebellion. Victor tried one last time. "Mr. Calloway, our understanding—" Ethan cut him off without raising his voice. "Ended the moment I saw how easily you used a young woman's life as collateral." That was all. No screaming, no dramatic fight. Just a dismissal so complete that Victor Hayes, a man who had ruled Ava's life through fear, suddenly looked very small. The guards escorted him and Helen back down the path. The darkness swallowed their angry voices. The gates closed behind them with a final metallic sound that echoed through Ava's chest. She stood alone in the grand entrance hall, wet, shaking, and so confused that fear itself seemed to split into smaller, stranger forms. A dignified older woman approached, holding a dry towel and a robe. She wore a simple gray dress, but her eyes were kind. "Come with me, child," she said softly. "My name is Margaret. You are safe for tonight." Safe. Ava almost laughed. The word felt foreign in her mouth before she even spoke it. She looked at Ethan, waiting for him to correct the woman, to reveal the trap hidden beneath this impossible calm. But he only said, "Take her to the East Suite. Bring food. Call the doctor, but only if she agrees." Only if she agrees. Ava followed Margaret through hallways too beautiful to feel real. Marble floors, carved wood walls, warm lamps, enormous paintings. Fresh flowers arranged in silver vases. The deeper they walked into the estate, the more unreal it all seemed. Ava had lived in a house where every cracked plate mattered, where electricity bills were discussed like funerals, where kindness only appeared when guests were watching. This place was another world. But what frightened her most was not the wealth. It was the absence of immediate cruelty. No leering servants, no locked doors, no mocking laughter. When Margaret opened the bedroom prepared for her, Ava stopped moving altogether. The room was larger than the entire upstairs of the house where she had grown up. There was a fireplace burning softly, a bed draped in cream linen, a tray with bread, soup, tea, fruit, and warm water for washing. Dry clothes folded neatly on a chair. Ava turned in slow disbelief. "Why?" she whispered. Margaret looked at her carefully. "Because you are exhausted." Ava shook her head. "No, that is not what I mean." Margaret's expression changed with sorrow. "I know," she said. "But tonight, that is all I can answer." A doctor arrived minutes later, carrying a small leather case. A maid followed with clean slippers and medicine for the bruise forming on Ava's wrist where Victor had gripped her too hard. Ava backed away immediately. "I'm not sick." "No one said you were." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. Ava turned sharply and found him standing there, still near the threshold as if careful not to crowd her. Even in silence, he seemed to command the room. "The doctor will leave if you want her to," he said. "Nothing will happen here without your permission." Ava stared at him. No powerful man she had ever heard of asked poor girls for permission. "What kind of game is this?" she whispered. Ethan held her gaze. "No game." "Then why am I here?" For the first time, something cracked beneath the control in his expression. "Because you were in danger," he said. Ava almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat. "Danger?" "I was just sold by my own parents to a man everyone fears." Ethan's jaw tightened. "The people who sold you are far more dangerous than I am." Margaret and the doctor exchanged a glance, but neither spoke. Ava's pulse hammered. Nothing in this house behaved the way terror had taught her it would. That night, sleep did not come. Ava lay stiff beneath sheets softer than anything she had ever touched, staring at the ceiling while the events replayed again and again until they no longer felt real. Sold, protected, safe, agreement, permission. Every word belonged to a different universe. Before dawn, she rose from bed, dressed in the simplest clothes left for her, and made her way downstairs. The estate was already awake. Servants moved in practiced silence. Somewhere nearby, phones rang and men discussed shipping contracts and investment deals. The entire mansion seemed built around Ethan's gravity. Margaret found her near the staircase and led her to breakfast, but Ava could barely swallow. "Where is he?" she asked. "In the West Study," Margaret said. "He's been working since 4. Ava frowned. "Who wakes willingly at 4? Margaret gave a faint, knowing smile. "A man with too many responsibilities and not enough peace." After breakfast, curiosity began to push harder than fear. Ava wandered through the house, memorizing corridors and doorways. No one stopped her. No one followed too closely. For the first time in years, movement itself felt like a choice instead of something granted by permission. She found Ethan in a glass-walled study overlooking the gardens. He stood by the window with a cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of files in the other. He noticed her before she spoke, as if some part of him had become aware of her presence the moment she entered the hall. "You should be resting," he said. Ava folded her arms tightly. "You said I could move freely." "You can." "Then I'm checking whether you lied." Something almost like amusement flickered through his face and disappeared. "You will find that I dislike lying." Ava took a step closer. "Then tell me the truth. Why did you buy me?" Ethan was silent long enough for anger to rise like heat through her chest. "What am I supposed to be now?" she demanded. "A servant? A prisoner? A secret?" Instead of answering, Ethan opened a drawer and placed a slim folder on the desk between them. "Read this first." Ava looked at it as though it might explode. "I'm not signing anything." "You don't have to sign tonight," he said. "But you should know exactly where you stand." With trembling fingers, she opened the folder. At the top of the first page were the words, "Temporary Protective Fiancé Agreement." Ava looked up in disbelief. "This is insane." Ethan gave a short nod. "Yes." She read the terms once, then twice, because they made less sense the more she saw them. She would live under full protection in the estate. No physical claim would be made over her. She would continue her education. All communication from Victor and Helen would go through lawyers. If any attempt were made to remove her from Ethan's protection, legal action would begin immediately. Publicly, She would be presented as Ethan Calloway's intended bride, ensuring no one else could claim rights over her or trade her elsewhere. Ava's breath caught in her throat. This was not the contract of a man buying a woman. It was the contract of a man building a wall around one. "Why?" she asked, louder now, almost angry because anger was easier than confusion. Ethan held her eyes, and when he answered, his voice carried something dangerously close to pain. "Because I got to you before they destroyed everything." The words made no sense, and yet something about them landed deep inside her, like a memory still asleep. Ava straightened. "You keep talking as if you know me." Ethan's silence told her more than words would have. Days passed in strange peace. No one touched Ava without permission. No doors were locked against her. A private tutor came to discuss university courses she had once wanted but never been allowed to pursue. A seamstress brought simple new clothes, chosen not for display but comfort. Margaret stayed close without hovering. Ethan remained a mystery. He was always near enough to know if something upset her, yet far enough not to suffocate her. One evening, while wandering through the upstairs library, Ava noticed a framed photograph on a side table. It showed a thin teenage boy sitting beneath an old elm tree near a neglected roadside station. His lip was split, his hand bandaged with rough cloth, his expression fierce even through exhaustion. Beside him sat a little girl in a faded yellow dress with one torn sleeve. The girl's face was half turned away, but Ava's body went cold. She knew that dress. She had worn it when she was small. She knew the patched shoulder, the mismatched hem, the cheap white ribbon at the waist. Her hand began to shake. A sound at the door made her spin around. Ethan stood there, and the moment he saw the photograph in her hand, every trace of calm in his face changed. "Who is this?" Ava asked, though part of her had already guessed the answer and was terrified of being right. Ethan did not speak at first. He crossed the room slowly, stopped an arm's length away, and looked at the photograph as though it were a relic from a life he had never truly left behind. "That is me," he said at last. Ava's voice trembled. "And the girl?" He lifted his gaze to hers. "You." The room tilted. "No." "Yes." She shook her head violently. "I would remember." Ethan's throat moved as he swallowed. "You were very young. Trauma buries more than pain. It buries memory, too." He took a careful breath and continued. "When I was 17, I had been beaten behind the old Gray Street station. I had nowhere to go, no money, no one willing to help. Then a little girl came over with half a sandwich and a bottle of water. She tore a piece from her own scarf, wrapped my bleeding hand, and told me that no one should live as though cruel people had the right to buy their future." Ava's heartbeat became deafening. A hot afternoon, red dust, an injured boy under a tree, her small hands clumsily tying cloth around split knuckles. A voice that sounded like her own saying, "Don't let bad people decide who you are." The memory hit her in broken flashes, so strong that tears sprang to her eyes before she understood why. "It was you," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. For the first time since she had met him, his eyes shone openly with emotion. "Yes." Ava looked again at the photograph, then back at him, stunned. "You remembered me All these years? His answer came immediately. Every day. Something in the absolute certainty of his voice made her chest ache. I searched for you when I had the means to do it, he said. I built my life. I followed records. I hired investigators. But by then your name had been altered, your address buried, your past rewritten. Ava stared at him, half moved and half afraid. Why? Ethan exhaled slowly, as if the truth had weight. Because you were the first person who ever looked at me when I had nothing, and still treated me like I mattered. Her lips parted, but before she could answer, his face darkened with the shadow of the deeper truth still waiting behind everything else. Ava, he said softly, the people who raised you are not your real parents. Everything inside her went still. What did you say? Ethan reached for a sealed envelope on the desk and held it out to her. I would not say this without proof. Her fingers barely worked as she opened it. Inside were copies of hospital records, a birth certificate, old tax documents, and a faded family photograph. A smiling man with kind eyes stood beside a woman whose face carried the exact softness Ava had never seen in Helen. The woman was holding a baby wrapped in pale fabric. Ethan's voice was steady, but sorrow lived in every word. Your real father was Daniel Hayes. He was Victor Hayes's older brother. Your real mother was Grace Hayes. They died when you were 4. But it was not an accident. Ava stumbled backward. No. Victor and Helen took you in after their deaths. They altered records. They claimed you as their daughter. They moved money tied to Daniel's estate, and they raised you with one long plan already forming. Ava's head shook violently. No. They told me my parents died in a car accident. Ethan's eyes hardened. The car was pushed from the mountain road. Silence broke around her like glass. No. Your parents were murdered, he said, and Victor and Helen were involved. Ava sank into the nearest chair before her legs gave out. Her whole body trembled as if the truth itself were cold. Stop, she whispered. Please stop. Ethan did not move closer. He lowered himself into the chair opposite hers instead, deliberately placing himself beneath her eye level. I know, he said quietly, but you deserve the truth now. Tears blurred the papers in her hands. They raised me. Ethan's answer was gentle and brutal at once. They controlled you. They fed me. They used you. They sent me to school. Because keeping you educated made you more valuable later. That sentence broke something inside her. A sob tore from her throat so sharply that she bent forward, covering her mouth with both hands. Years of small humiliations came rushing back in new colors. Every time Helen called her ungrateful. Every time Victor told her she should be thankful she had a roof. Every time she was reminded she cost too much. Every time love had been dangled in front of her like payment she never quite earned. Ethan's voice softened even more. When I found out they planned to sell you the moment you turned 18, I moved first. I bought the debt because it was the fastest way to take you out of their reach. Ava cried until her body hurt. Ethan did not rush her. He did not touch her. He simply remained there, a steady presence in the storm, waiting without demanding anything in return. At last, through trembling breath, she asked the question buried beneath every other one. Why didn't they love me? Ethan's face changed with a kind of quiet devastation. "Because greed hollows people out," he said. "And once it does, they stop seeing human beings. They only see usefulness." Ava closed her eyes. The answer did not heal, but it did something else. It took the blame off her shoulders for the first time in her life. Maybe she had never been hard to love. Maybe the people who raised her had simply never been capable of love at all. That realization hurt worse than anything and freed her more deeply than she could yet understand. Late that night, when the tears had thinned and silence filled the room, Ethan spoke again. "You are not what they made you believe." Ava looked up. He met her gaze with complete steadiness. "You were never their burden, never their debt, never their property. You are Daniel and Grace's daughter, and no one will ever sell your life again." The next morning, Ava did not hide in her room. She walked into the dining room with red eyes and a straighter spine. Ethan was already there, reading a briefing on his tablet. He put it aside the moment he saw her. "I want all of it," she said. "The files, the investigators, the reports. I want to know everything about my parents." Ethan nodded instantly. "You will." She swallowed. "And if I decide to leave after I know the truth?" His face tightened in a way that told her the possibility hurt him, but his answer never changed. "Then I will help you leave safely." That mattered, more than she let show. Over the next 2 weeks, he gave her full access to every document his team had collected. She learned that Daniel had discovered missing funds in the family export business. She learned that Grace had planned to expose the fraud. She learned there had been large insurance payouts after the so-called accident, and that Victor's life improved far too quickly afterward. She learned that Helen had signed false guardianship forms and withdrawn money meant for Ava's future. The cruelty had not been impulsive. It had been organized, planned, patient. They had kept her alive not out of guilt, but investment. As the truth settled, Ethan changed the rhythm of the house around her. He arranged counseling without forcing it. He enrolled her in an online degree program in social development because years earlier she had once told a school teacher she wanted to help women who had nowhere to go. He remembered that from an old report. He remembered everything. Ava should have found that unsettling, yet somehow it felt different from control. Ethan never chose for her. He only made choices possible. She began studying in the mornings. In the afternoons, she walked the estate gardens, relearning what it felt like for time to belong to her. Some evenings, she and Ethan sat in the library with coffee and said very little. Silence no longer always meant fear. Sometimes it meant safety. Sometimes it meant two damaged people learning how not to frighten each other. And slowly, terrifyingly, Ava became aware of something else growing between them. It was not gratitude. It was not dependence. It was a warmth she felt most when Ethan looked away first, as if even now he feared asking for too much. One evening, she caught him watching her while she read and asked quietly, "Why do you look at me like that?" He answered with dangerous honesty, "Because some part of me still can't believe I found you again." Weeks later, the outside world began whispering. The city learned that Ethan Calloway had taken a young woman into his home under mysterious circumstances. Gossip blogs sharpened their knives. Business rivals smelled scandal. A society woman named Celeste Warren, whose family had long expected an alliance with Ethan through marriage, spoke to the press with carefully disguised venom. Soon, headlines exploded everywhere. Billionaire hides poor girl in private estate. Was she bought? Was she rescued? Was she his mistress? Ava stared at the screens in the media room while shame and fury fought inside her. Ethan stood behind her with a face carved from stone. "They're turning me into a rumor again," she whispered. "No," he said coldly. "They are trying to make you easier to dismiss." He turned to his legal advisor. "Prepare the gala announcement." Ava frowned. "What gala?" Ethan met her eyes. "The Calloway Foundation dinner next week. I was already expected to make a public, personal announcement." She understood instantly. "You want to present me as your fiancé?" "Yes." The word hung in the room. "You can refuse." Ava's pulse quickened. Public exposure terrified her, but hiding was beginning to feel like another kind of surrender. "And if I say yes?" she asked. Ethan's gaze never wavered. "Then the entire city will know no one gets to speak about you as if you are something to trade." She said yes. Not to marriage yet, not to love, not to forever. Only to standing beside truth instead of shrinking from lies. The night of the gala arrived under crystal lights and a hard, watchful moon. Ava stood before the mirror in a deep blue gown Margaret had helped choose. Simple but elegant, her hair pinned softly back from her face. For a moment, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She had expected to feel dressed like an imposter. Instead, she felt like someone uncovered. When the bedroom door opened, Ethan stepped inside in a black tuxedo and stopped walking. His expression changed completely. Gone was the cold, feared magnate. In his place stood a man visibly struck by the sight of her. "You're beautiful," he said, and the unguarded honesty in his voice made her cheeks warm instantly. Margaret smiled and quietly left them alone. Ethan stepped closer, though not too close. "Tonight they will try to provoke you," he said. "Especially Celeste." Ava lifted her chin. "Then they'll be disappointed." Something like pride flashed through his face. He offered his hand. "Ready?" Ava looked at it, then at him. "No," she admitted. "But I'm coming anyway." He gave the faintest smile. "That may be the bravest definition of ready I've ever heard." The ballroom was a storm of diamonds, cameras, champagne, and quiet cruelty. The moment Ethan entered with Ava on his arm, conversations broke apart across the room. Every eye turned, every whisper sharpened. Ava felt the weight of wealth studying her, measuring her, trying to decide what kind of threat a poor girl beside a powerful man could become. Then she saw Celeste Warren. Tall, poised, dressed in crimson silk, she approached with a smile too polished to be kind. "So this is the girl," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I must say, Ethan, you always did have a flair for shocking acquisitions." Ethan's expression chilled instantly. "Careful, Celeste." But Celeste's eyes slid over Ava with open disdain. "I'm only curious. Do girls come with invoices now, or only debts?" Laughter rippled from the wrong kind of people. Ava felt every old humiliation rise like fire beneath her skin. For 1 second she wanted to disappear. Then she remembered Victor's hand on her arm, Helen's voice, the sale, the truth. She straightened. "My name is Ava Hayes," she said clearly, and the nearby laughter died at once. "And whatever anyone thinks happened to me, None of you get to define my worth by the price cruel people tried to place on it." The room went still. Celeste blinked, startled that the poor girl had a voice sharp enough to cut through silk and status. Ava continued, her own fear now burning into strength. "Yes, the people who raised me sold me. But if you think that means I was ever theirs to sell, then your poverty is deeper than mine ever was." A gasp passed through the crowd. Celeste's face flushed. Ethan stepped beside Ava, one hand settling lightly at the small of her back, not possession, but alignment. "You will not speak to her again," he said to Celeste with quiet menace, "unless it is with respect." Then he led Ava toward the stage. Every camera in the ballroom followed them. The foundation chair handed Ethan the microphone. He looked over the room, then turned to Ava with a softness that seemed impossible in a man like him. "Since many of you appear deeply invested in my personal life," he said coldly to the audience, "allow me to make this simple. The woman beside me is under my full protection. She is not my scandal. She is my future." And then, to Ava's shock, he lowered himself to one knee. The ballroom erupted. Her breath vanished. Ethan looked up at her, eyes dark and unwavering. "Ava," he said, "one day, when you are ready, I intend to ask you to be my wife for real." The crowd exploded into shocked whispers, but Ava heard almost none of it. Something about the way Ethan said, "for real," tore through every layer of defense she had built around her heart. He was not claiming her. He was not cornering her. He was saying openly, before the city, that choice would always belong to her. That night after the gala, the internet caught fire. Some called Ethan honorable. Others called him dangerous. Some accused Ava of ambition. Others saw survival. But back at the estate, once the dresses and lights and cameras were gone, the truth felt smaller and more fragile. Ava found Ethan alone in the library after midnight, tie loosened, jacket gone. One hand braced against the mantel, as though the evening had cost him more than he was willing to admit. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He turned. "Because I meant it." She stepped closer. "You said one day." Ethan's expression shifted with painful honesty. "Because I would rather wait years for you to choose me freely than win you tonight through gratitude, fear, or pressure." Ava's throat tightened. There was nothing theatrical left in him now. Just the wounded boy beneath the man. "And if I never choose you?" she whispered. Ethan swallowed once. "Then I will still spend the rest of my life grateful I found you before they broke you completely." The next month softened something between them that neither had dared name yet. Ava threw herself into study and therapy, and Ethan quietly moved mountains around her without ever announcing the effort. He adjusted work travel so he would be nearby during difficult court consultations. He had a music teacher come after learning Ava used to sing as a child, before Helen mocked her into silence. He converted an empty wing room into a study lined with books from subjects she had once loved. But the deepest change came not from gifts. It came from restraint. Ethan never once used her dependence against her. Never demanded emotional returns. Never reached for her in fragile moments without permission. That kind of patience was more intimate than grand gestures. Ava began to watch him too. The way he rubbed the scar across his knuckles when stressed. The way his face softened whenever Margaret laughed. The way exhaustion sat behind his eyes after long nights fighting business wars no one else noticed. One rainy afternoon, while they were reviewing case files together, Ava looked up and realized she was no longer afraid of silence with him. In a life shaped by threat, that felt almost like a miracle. And miracles, she was learning, often arrived quietly. Meanwhile, far from the city, Victor and Helen Hayes were enjoying the life they believed they had finally purchased for themselves. With Ethan's money in hand, they flew to Santorini under fake smiles and expensive clothes, telling distant relatives they were taking a healing vacation after family tensions. They rented a white cliffside villa with a pool overlooking the sea. Helen posted photographs of sunsets and designer handbags. Victor drank imported wine and laughed about how easy it had all been. 18 years, he said one night, swirling his glass. Not a bad return on patience. Helen smirked. She was always too soft to suspect anything. Daniel's daughter had his stupid heart. They toasted to money stolen from a dead brother, to a girl they had starved of affection, to a future they believed they deserved. They did not know that across the city, the truth was already being assembled with legal precision. They did not know Ava had learned who she really was. Most of all, they did not know that not every punishment waits politely inside a courthouse. Some arrive from a darker sky, across deep water, when arrogant people begin to believe they have outrun consequence itself. Back at the estate, Ethan's investigators found another key piece of evidence, a recording from years earlier linking Victor to falsified vehicle reports and insurance fraud after Daniel and Grace's deaths. Ava listened with both hands pressed to her mouth, while voices from the past confirmed everything she had feared. Her real parents had not died because of rain or bad luck. Victor had tampered with the car. Helen had helped create alibis. They had taken her in only after deciding what her silence would be worth in the future. When the recording ended, Ava stood frozen for so long, Ethan thought she might collapse. "Say something," he murmured. She turned to him, eyes full of tears but colder than he had ever seen them. "If I had wanted," she said shakily, "I could spend the rest of my life making sure they rot in prison." Ethan held her gaze. "Yes. And part of me wants that." "I know." Ava looked down at the papers. "But another part of me is tired. Tired of them still deciding what my life is about." Ethan's voice was gentle. "Then let your life be about something bigger than revenge." She swallowed hard. "Could you still take them to court?" "Yes," he said. "Whenever you choose." She nodded slowly, but her eyes had already moved somewhere beyond law, beyond punishment, toward a harder kind of peace. Summer deepened over Santorini. The sea glittered like polished glass for days, and Victor began acting as if the world had blessed his greed. On their 6th evening there, he booked a private sunset yacht tour despite warnings from the harbor staff that the weather might change overnight. The captain advised postponing. Victor doubled the fee. Helen laughed and said storms were for unlucky people. They boarded wearing white linen, gold jewelry, and the smug ease of those who mistake temporary comfort for permanent safety. At first the sea was calm, the sky painted in orange and violet. Helen leaned against the rail taking pictures. Victor drank too much and spoke too loudly about all the places they would visit next with their new beginning. Then the wind shifted, fast, violently. Clouds swallowed the sunset in minutes. The captain barked orders. Crew members scrambled. Helen's laughter vanished. The first wave struck the side of the yacht with enough force to knock her to the deck. Victor shouted at the captain as if money could command the weather. Thunder cracked open the sky. Rain came in hard silver sheets. The sea rose like something alive and angry. The yacht lurched once, twice, then tilted sharply as a wall of black water crashed over the bow. Helen screamed Victor's name as the deck vanished beneath rushing seawater. Glass shattered, metal groaned. The captain tried to turn back toward harbor, but the storm had already swallowed direction. Victor slipped, slammed against the rail, and reached blindly for anything solid. Helen clung to a pole, mascara mixed with rain, diamond bracelet flashing uselessly in the lightning. For one terrible second, they locked eyes. Not as husband and wife, not as schemers, but as two human beings facing something far larger than themselves. Then another monstrous wave struck broadside. The railing tore loose. The deck tilted. Both of them were thrown into the dark sea. Their final cries vanished under thunder. By dawn, rescue teams found wreckage, floating cushions, shattered wood, and one overturned life raft. There were no survivors. The storm had taken them whole. Back in the city, the call reached Ethan just after sunrise. He listened in silence, ended the call, and stood very still for several seconds before asking Margaret to bring Ava to the conservatory. He did not know how to say it gently. There are truths no careful wording can soften. There are endings that arrive with the violence of destiny. Ava knew something was wrong the moment she saw Ethan's face. He stood near the glass wall overlooking the morning garden, one hand in his pocket, the other tense at his side. Margaret quietly left them alone. "What happened?" Ava asked. Ethan looked at her steadily. "Victor and Helen are dead." The words landed without sound at first, like a door opening into emptiness. "What?" she whispered. "Their yacht was caught in a storm off Santorini last night. The vessel went down. There were no survivors." Ava did not move. She had imagined so many versions of justice: police handcuffs, courtroom cameras, public disgrace, begging apologies. She had never imagined this: sudden, absolute, and beyond appeal. She turned away and wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." Ethan came closer, but not too close. "You don't have to decide today." Her voice broke. "Part of me is relieved. Part of me is angry they never had to hear me call them what they were. Part of me—" She stopped. Ethan waited. "Part of me is terrified that this means God saw everything." Ethan's eyes lowered. Maybe he did. The conservatory filled with morning light while Ava stood trembling between grief, rage, relief, and awe. That afternoon she went alone to the small chapel on the far side of the estate, a place she had only seen once before. Sunlight spilled through colored glass across rows of empty wooden pews. Ava lit one candle for Daniel, one for Grace. Then, after a long hesitation, she lit two smaller ones for Victor and Helen. Not because they deserved softness, but because she wanted to place even that darkness somewhere outside herself. When Ethan found her, she was kneeling with her hands clasped, not praying for them, not exactly, but releasing them. "I don't forgive what they did," she said without turning around. Ethan's answer came quietly from behind her. "You do not have to." Ava swallowed. "But I think I understand something now." He waited. "If I had wanted," she said slowly, "I could have dragged them through court. I could have made them answer before a judge. And maybe that would have been justice. But this?" She looked up at the colored light. "This feels like God answered before I had to." Ethan's face was solemn when she finally looked at him. "Yes," he said. "This was not human justice. This was something else." A deep, trembling calm moved through Ava then. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Something steadier. Something that sounded like the first note of peace. From that day on, the past stopped feeling like a prison and began feeling like a road she had already crossed. Ethan handled the legal aftermath with precision, ensuring Daniel and Grace's estate was restored properly in Ava's name. He had Victor and Helen's fraudulent records unsealed. He told the lawyers to proceed publicly with the truth, not for revenge, but to clear Ava's identity forever. News outlets covered the scandal for weeks. False guardians exposed, brother implicated in decades-old murder, heiress sold at 18 by fraudulent caretakers. The world was outraged, but for once, its outrage did not consume Ava. She no longer belonged to headlines. She belonged to herself. One evening, standing on the terrace while the wind moved gently through the gardens below, Ethan joined her with 2 cups of tea. "Do you still wish they had lived to face court?" he asked. Ava thought about it for a long while. "Maybe once I did," she said. "But now, no. If I'm honest, the sentence I imagined was always too small. Prison would have been justice. What happened was judgment." Ethan looked at her carefully. "And are you at peace with that?" Ava's eyes grew soft. "Yes, because for the first time, I am not carrying the weight of punishing them myself." The months that followed changed their relationship from careful tenderness into something deeper and more dangerous because it was real. Ethan was still patient, still restrained, still unwilling to ask for what she had not yet freely offered. But Ava saw the love in him now, without needing him to confess it. She saw it in the way he listened when she spoke about her parents, in the way he read her silences without trespassing on them, in the way he looked almost relieved every time she laughed. One evening, they returned to Gray Street Station, now half restored and nearly unrecognizable beneath city redevelopment. Yet the old elm tree still stood at the edge of the pavement. They stopped beneath it, and memories seemed to ripple through the air between them. Ethan took a slow breath. "I have loved you in one form or another since the day you sat beside me here," he said. "At first it was gratitude, then hope, then the memory of the only kindness I had ever received when I was young and broken. Later, after I found you again, it became something far more dangerous, because I knew I would rather lose almost anything than lose you a second time." Ava's heart beat painfully. "Why are you telling me now?" Ethan's voice softened. "Because I do not want another day built on unsaid truth." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small velvet box, not opening it yet, just holding it carefully, as if even hope should not be rushed. "The gala promise was real," he said. "But this is different. This is not strategy, not protection, not optics. It is only me." Ava could barely breathe. Ethan looked at her with no shield left in his face. "Ava Hayes, if you ever choose me, I want it to be because you want my hand beside yours. Not because I saved you. Not because I protected you. Not because fate dragged us into each other's lives. I want to be chosen by the woman you became when no one was controlling her. So I am asking now, openly and honestly." He finally opened the box. Inside was a ring simple enough to be elegant, beautiful enough to carry a lifetime. "Will you marry me?" For a second, the city noise faded. The wind hushed. The world narrowed to the man who had once been a wounded boy under this tree and had spent years becoming strong enough not to own her life, but to honor it. Tears filled Ava's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger, through a smile breaking around tears. "Yes, Ethan. I choose you." Ethan looked stunned for half a heartbeat, as if his body needed time to believe what his soul had heard. Then he slipped the ring onto her finger with visibly shaking hands. Ava laughed through tears, and he let out a broken breath that sounded almost like prayer. When he rose, she touched his face, and the kiss they shared beneath the old elm tree was soft, reverent, and wholly different from desperation. It was not rescue. It was not payment. It was choice. Their wedding took place 6 months later in a stone chapel overlooking a lake outside the city. The ceremony was intimate, filled with warm candlelight, white roses, and people who had become family by love rather than blood. Margaret cried through almost the entire service. When the officiant asked who gave the bride, Ava answered before anyone else could. "I come of my own free will." Ethan's eyes shone at those words. In his vows, he promised never to make fear a foundation for love. In hers, Ava promised never to let pain convince her she was difficult to cherish again. When they kissed as husband and wife, it felt as though 2 long, broken roads had finally become one road home. Marriage did not make Ava retreat into comfort. It made her fiercer. With her inheritance restored and Ethan's unwavering support behind her, but never above her, she founded the Daniel and Grace Foundation, named for the parents whose truth had nearly been buried forever. The foundation's purpose was clear from the beginning: to provide legal aid, education, housing, and long-term protection for poor women and vulnerable children who had been abandoned, exploited, sold, threatened, or controlled by the very families who should have protected them. Ava did not simply lend her name to the work. She built it. She sat in planning rooms until midnight drafting policy with legal teams. She visited shelters. She funded tuition. She opened trauma care programs. She created emergency safe homes for girls who had nowhere to run. She made sure no woman entering her doors would ever again hear the language of burden, debt, shame, or gratitude for survival. "No one is saved here by pity," she told her staff at the opening ceremony. "They are supported with dignity." Ethan stood at the back of the room that day, watching her with quiet pride, knowing this was the truest version of the girl who had once torn cloth from her own scarf to help a bleeding stranger survive. The foundation grew faster than anyone expected. Women came from poor neighborhoods, from remote towns, from abusive homes hidden behind respectable gates. Some arrived with children. Some arrived with nothing but fear. Ava met many of them herself. She listened without interrupting. She knew when silence was needed more than speeches. She knew how humiliation sat in the body. She knew what it meant to have your life discussed like a burden between people who thought they owned your future. Every girl who looked at her with frightened eyes saw not a distant benefactor, but a woman who understood. She used her story carefully, not as spectacle, but as testimony. And every time she spoke publicly, she made one truth clear. What happened to you is not proof that you were unworthy. It is proof that evil recognized your value before you did. Those words spread far beyond the foundation walls. Interviews followed. Awards followed. Public respect followed. But Ava remained anchored to the work itself, because she had not built the foundation to heal her image. She had built it to interrupt the cycle that had nearly swallowed her whole. And in doing so, she transformed personal survival into shelter for countless others. Years later, on quiet evenings, Ava and Ethan sometimes sat together on the terrace of their home while city lights shimmered below. These were the moments when memory no longer arrived like a blade. It came softer now, like rain against distant windows. One night, Ava turned her ring slowly around her finger and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not found me in time?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he admitted. "And every version of that future still terrifies me." Ava leaned into him. "You did find me." He kissed the top of her head. "Yes." She looked out across the dark sky and thought of Daniel and Grace, of Victor and Helen, of Gray Street, of Stormwater and Iron Gates, of the girl she had been and the woman she had become. "If I had wanted," she said softly, "I could have taken those false parents to court and demanded a human sentence for what they did. But I did not have to. God judged them himself. And somehow, that gave me a better ending than any courtroom could have." Ethan's hand tightened gently around hers. It did. She smiled faintly. "Justice is important. But what God gave me was more than justice. He gave me back my name, my truth, my future, and the chance to use my life for others." That became the real ending of Ava's story. Not the storm, not the sale, not even the marriage. The real ending was that she was no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by what she built afterward. The people who raised her had spent 18 years preparing to sell her. The man who bought her chose instead to protect her, educate her, tell her the truth, and wait until love could stand on freedom instead of fear. The false parents who murdered her real family and sold her for money believed they had escaped every consequence. But God met them at sea before any judge could. And Ava, instead of spending the rest of her life chained to vengeance, opened her hands toward mercy's harder work. She built a foundation for poor women and children. She gave shelter where there had been threat, choice where there had been coercion, dignity where there had been shame. And she remained happy with God's justice because it left her free to become something greater than a victim. It left her free to become refuge. That is why her story matters. Because sometimes the deepest healing begins not when the villain falls, but when the survivor finally remembers her worth. I got Ava justice from God. That was my only wish, to see Ava receive justice from God.